This video will show you how to make an auxiliary fence for an Incra 5000 miter sled. You can see I have an auxiliary fence on here now, this piece of plywood, but it's for 90-degree cuts. I need one that's for 45-degree bevel cuts. That's what I'm going to show you how to make. I'm going to use a CNC to make mine. You really don't need a CNC for it. The file is available for free. You could either use that to cut it on a CNC, or you could use it to get the measurements and make your own without a CNC.
The fence is 3/4 inch plywood, 3.5 inches tall, 18 inches wide. You're really going to want 3 of them. One for making straight cuts, one for making 45-degree miters, and one for making 45-degree bevels. Swapping the fences is quick and easy. One of the limitations of this sled, however, is if you go from a straight cut, a 90-degree cut, to a bevel cut, that's a little bit more involved. I will demonstrate later. I'm using my Shaper Origin CNC router to cut the fence. You could easily just use regular woodworking equipment to do the same thing. I attached the fence material to the workstation for Shaper Origin and scanned it in. I'm going to show you a worm's eye view of gridding. You lower the router bit, take a tap, and then a second tap on the front side of the board, go around the left corner and take a tap on the left of the board. That's going to place a grid with the 0, 0 point on that front left corner of the board. Next, I import my file and simply tell the Shaper Origin that I want that left-hand corner at 0, 0, and it will place the file just where I want to cut it out of that piece of plywood. The cut's quite simple. I used AutoPass for it. The front and left-hand side of the board, I'm not really cutting anything at all because I placed the file where I, wouldn't have to cut on those edges. But, if I'd placed the file in the middle, I would just have a little bit more cutting to do. It would work just fine. The mounting holes are 1/4 inch through holes plus some countersinks to let the nuts fit. Here's what those mounting holes look like. All the depths are encoded in the CNC file. The hardware is simply 2 1/4 inch hex head bolts, 3/4 inch long, and 2 nuts. You'll need a 7/16 inch nut driver. The head of the bolts go in the back of the fence, the nuts go in the countersink, and just do them loosely to start with. Since the blade is beveled towards the fence, you're going to need to move it over. There's a couple of screws to loosen to do that. You just want to make sure that the saw blade doesn't hit the aluminum. The 2 bolts just simply slide in the slot that's provided on the fence, and use the nut driver to tighten them down. Before making the first cut, I measured the blade to make sure it was at 45. I double-checked that with my little Wixie angle gauge. It came out at 45.1, but that's within the margin of error. I did not record that first bevel cut, but there it is. I did do a sample cut in some scrap just to make sure I'd ended up with a 90-degree angle, and I'm satisfied that I did.
It's worth mentioning how the flip stop works with the auxiliary fence. I will show you how that just kind of seamlessly transitions from one to the other. It's really easy to do. This is how the flip stop looks when you're not using the auxiliary fence. So it just rides right along the regular aluminum fence. It gets down really nice and tight to that. To use it with the auxiliary fence, I'm going to loosen these 2 bolts, just hex head bolts. It's the same tool you'd use for other adjustments on the fence. So those would get loosened up. The trick to this is to not loosen them too much and lose the little nuts in the back. But then it just lines up on another slot that's 3/4 inch further away from the operator than the first side, and it slides on there pretty easily. You can tighten it back down. Now when I go to move the flip stop over the auxiliary fence, tighten it down. Now it's riding against the auxiliary fence and gets a pretty nice tight fit there. The flip stop has a little micro adjusting bolt. Again, you'd use the same hex head to adjust that. But if you've got that dialed in with the exact length of the cut when you're not using the auxiliary fence, it keeps the same registration. So the flip stop still registers in the same spot on the micro adjuster, whether or not you're using the auxiliary fence. So that's pretty nifty. All right, I believe Incra makes other miter gauges that use this same fence, but that don't ride on the sled, right? This one rides on a sled. I believe you could use the same design for this fence on the other Incra miter gauges, but you'd have to make one modification to take into account the thickness of the sled. It's a pretty easy modification, I'll show you. If you don't have one of these sleds, your miter gauge is just riding on the top of the table saw surface rather than on top of the sled, you'll have a deeper cut that you can make with the blade fully extended. And because of that, you would need to make this ear a half inch or so, 9/16 or so higher, so that you're going to have some margin for error and not come really close to slicing the ear off if you make a cut at the full depth of the blade. So now I'm going to get into something that's at least going to be a minor annoyance in using the sled for bevel cuts. This has nothing to do with auxiliary fence. This issue is going to exist whether or not you use an auxiliary fence for bevel cuts. The thing is, this sled has zero clearance on both sides of the saw blade. I've already cut this side of it, this left-hand side of it, down for zero clearance on my bevel right there. You can see that. I haven't yet done it on the right side. I'm about to do that. But that means if I cut it for 90 degrees zero clearance or 45 degrees zero clearance for a bevel cut over here, I won't have zero clearance at 90 degrees. But Incra sells a replacement for these two pieces, so I'm just basically going to have to swap out these two pieces anytime I want to make, change from bevel cuts to straight cuts. So in order to swap this out to make a cuts with a 90-degree blade, I'm going to have to remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 screws.
Here I'm setting up the sled so I can recut a new panel to use for straight cuts. Once I remove the 11 screws, I will just set those panels aside. They'll have the cuts in for bevel cuts, but I'll only put those back on the sled when I want to make a bevel cut. I'm normally going to be using this for straight cuts, I'm sure. Here's the new auxiliary panel from Incra. There's a miter slider that goes on the right hand of the right side of the saw blade. I'll make a straight cut with that, then attach the offcut onto the fence side, the left side of the blade on that part of the sled, make a second cut, and then I'll have my perfect zero clearance from those two. Of course, I've got to replace the screws that I previously took out before I can make that cut. Swapping these plates is a bit of a hassle, so I'll only use the sled for bevel cuts when it's really important.
That's it on the auxiliary fences. Thanks for watching. If you've watched this far, I appreciate it. Would welcome your subscription. I would love it if you would hit the like button, and hope to see you back here soon. Thanks very much. Bye.